The British High Commission has commended Osun voters for their peaceful participation in the August 15 governorship election while highlighting challenges that require attention. The commission said its accredited observers found polls opened as scheduled in many locations, while security personnel maintained order and INEC officials effectively implemented electoral procedures. However, it raised concerns over isolated incidents, vote buying, limited access for persons with disabilities and elderly voters, as well as overcrowding linked to BVAS accreditation. For more on this, Kimpact Development Initiative Program Manager Mercy Abiem joins us now to share thoughts and insights from observing the elections. Thank you very much for being here with us. How would you rate the overall conduct of the polls, and what would you say were some of the biggest challenges highlighted across board? Would you just say the ones highlighted by the High Commission was most accurate?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. The Osun State Governorship elections, Kimpact Development Initiative was an accredited observer group that participated in the elections, and we had observers deployed across all of the 332 wards in Osun State. And from observations, Kimpact Development would rate the conduct of the Osun State governorship elections as fairly satisfactory. However, there are some important shortcomings from the elections that cannot be overlooked. We all know that the elections was generally competitive and it was highly contested. But from our field observations, we identify some operational and technological challenges. From our observations in the field on the elections day, we observed that BVAS functioned fairly. Over 84% of our observations, we observed 84% success rate of BVAS accreditation. However, there are still some loopholes in the BVAS accreditation. Just 15% of our reports from the field shows failure of BVAS accreditation. Now, one would wonder why BVAS accreditation is failing, because during the mock accreditation, KDI raised concerns around the BVAS failing to accredit old voters, just like the chairman had mentioned. However, we still saw those challenges observed in the Osun State governorship elections, and also there were cases around. Though the elections was largely peaceful, we still have some pockets of electoral violence reported. From our tracking in the data room where we set up and information gotten from our field observers, we recorded over 17 cases of electoral violence. However, we did not record any fatality. This is something that from our trackings pre-elections, we had recorded over 81 cases of electoral violence, and out of these 81 cases, we had up to like 17 deaths. But on the day of the elections, it was quite fair that the election violence cases were not as much as the pre-election cases, and then there was no fatality. So overall, we would rate the conduct of Osun State governorship elections as a fair elections, though there were pockets of challenges that the INEC and also the security agencies would need to look out for.
The police say they've had about 295 suspects, yeah? But that most of them have been released. Only 2 still remain in custody. If you juxtapose this with other elections and other figures that have been released, would you say that this is a further confirmation that we are sliding away from violence during electoral processes, and that it foretells some good things for the 2027 elections?
So just like our tracking for the pre-election before the August 15th governorship elections in Osun State. Like I mentioned, we had tracked 81 cases of election violence. However, the 295 arrests made by the police is actually a significant number, but I think that should not automatically be interpreted as 295 confirmed cases of electoral violence. Though the police said that 293 of these suspects have been released, and then 2 still remain in custody for further investigation. What the number tells us is that a substantial number of incidents or most of these suspected offenses occurred around the election environment and they required police intervention. And then it also reinforces the need to take electoral offenses seriously rather than treating them as an unavoidable future for future elections as we head to the 2027 general elections.
Talk to us about the claims about ghost voters, hired voters, and then the electoral umpire dismissing such claims, emphasizing that BVAS make that impossible. Did you hear of such observations during the polls, and were they credible to your knowledge?
So I would still link this to the mock accreditation and then the issues observed with the BVAS during the elections, right? So INEC positioned that the BVAS makes conventional forms of ghost voting difficult is technically credible, right? Because a person has to be accredited through the prescribed voting authentication process before voting at a polling unit. However, I would distinguish between what BVAS makes ghost voting difficult and electoral fraud is impossible. The fact that BVAS makes ghost voting difficult does not mean that electoral fraud is actually impossible. Like I said, BVAS functioned optimally, and we had over 15% failure rate in authentication attempts, right? Technology can reduce certain forms of fraud, but it cannot independently eliminate some of these attempts, right? And it's important to note that BVAS is an important safeguard, and the effectiveness of the BVAS depends on a reliable functioning of the BVAS, right? Now, we would advise that going into the 2027 elections, INEC does a complete audit of the election technology that we would use going into the election to ensure that some of these challenges that were faced with the BVAS
does not come again.
Yes, it's tackled before the 2027 elections.
Let's move away from BVAS for a bit and just talk about the fact that the APC is saying they are reviewing results and may approach the election tribunal, considering the fact that some of the APC bigwigs, including the president, has said, congratulated the re-elected governor of Osun State. What are your thoughts about perhaps safeguard necessary to reduce post-election disputes, and if we do have them go to the tribunal, transparently resolved?
So the most important safeguard is that every grievance, maybe from an election, should be channeled through evidence and establish legal processes, rather than just political rhetoric and maybe street mobilization. There are actually 4 things I would actually like to emphasize. First, we need to preserve the evidence. The polling unit results from the elections, BVAS accreditation data, the result sheets need to be properly preserved and made available by parties if these parties involved seek legal redress at the courts. And they also need to allow legitimate access to election materials. So for each party that is seeking redress at the courts for the elections, the materials have to be made available for inspection and then to obtain relevant evidence through the lawful process. I would also state that the judicial process needs to be transparent. We need to strengthen judicial transparency. The election petitions should be handled quite well, and the decision should clearly explain how this evidence was evaluated. It is it is every right of a political party to challenge the outcomes of an election. But political actors must commit to peaceful dispute resolutions and to avoid some of these post-elections, inflammatory statements, threats, or maybe an attempt to mobilize voters against maybe
Mercy.
opposing parties while litigation is actually ongoing in court.
It's always a pleasure to have you on the news. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you so much for having me.